All right, welcome to today's webinar. Our topic for today is how to determine if you are overpaying for medical waste disposal. My name is Megan Klein and I will facilitate our meeting today. Please note, the information contained in our presentation today is intended to provide general information, but not advice about certain regulations and initiatives. This is not intended as legal or other advice, and each situation may vary depending on the particular facts and circumstances. You should not act upon any of this information without first consulting qualified legal counsel. Today's webinar will be presented by Desiree, Murillo, and Lauren, Komppa. Desiree leads the long-term care space at OnSite Waste alongside Direct Supply. Together, they've set out to build RMW-specific programs for assisted living and skilled nursing facilities with the goal to bring optimization through OnSite's technology. Through a consultative approach, she has successfully provided those in the long-term care space with program efficiencies, safety, and savings. Beginning in November of 2020, Lauren has been dedicated to channel partnerships, including the partnership with Direct Supply and OnSite Waste. Prior to OnSite, Lauren helped mid-sized organizations scale efficiently and increase profitability by implementing technology and internal infrastructure to positively impact their bottom line. And now, please welcome Lauren.
Hi there. So we are excited to walk you through our presentation today. So OnSite Waste, we are a medical waste technology company really focusing on optimization and transparency within a medical waste disposal process. We build out successful programs really aligning with industry standards and transparency and creating efficiencies. Over the past 2 years, we've partnered with Direct Supply and really identified a lot of gaps in infrastructure within medical waste disposal programs, specifically in the long-term care space. So today we'll be walking you through what those gaps are and then sharing some best practices. So on our agenda today, we'll walk you through your medical waste process and some common pain points that you may be experiencing, how to analyze your current program, and then how to optimize your program and reduce your spend. Next slide, please. So the first part of our discussion will be around your medical waste process and some common pain points that you may have. So let's start from the beginning. The medical waste industry, the hauling industry has really kind of become the industry standard since the 1960s. That was obviously a very long time ago. The 1960s, that was when the first video game console was invented, the cassette tape was created, and then medical waste hauling was industry standard. So since the 1960s, there's been a lot of innovation and technology. However, that process has really stayed the same. So in our personal lives and our professional lives, there's been a lot of advancement. So for example, instead of video game consoles, we now have VR technology. Instead of the cassette tape, we have streaming music. However, medical waste hauling is still the industry standard. There's lack of transparency in this process, and it's kind of the necessary evil of having medical waste. You have to have someone come pick it up. So we're really going to be uncovering and peeling back the layers of the onion of this process today. So it's important to know kind of how this process works. So we wanted to walk you through really what happens to your medical waste after it leaves your facility. So most of the time it's, once it leaves, it's out of sight, out of mind. But let's kind of start from the beginning. So your waste is collected at your facility. And from there, it is stored in a biohazard room or closet. And once it's stored, you have your medical waste provider. They come out, they park their truck outside of your facility. They walk through your facility, they collect that waste, and they take it out to their truck. There, the waste is actually taken to a temporary facility. And the waste stays there until there's enough waste to be picked up by an even larger truck that takes it to where it's eventually being treated. So The waste is treated either by being autoclaved or incinerated, and there's actually only a few treatment plants within the entire country. So the truck is typically driving it across state lines just for it to be treated. So once that waste is treated, then it's taken to the landfill. So what's important to know about this process is that your liability does not end when the waste leaves your facility. Your liability actually ends at the end of that road there when the waste is treated and it's considered no longer infectious. So, the big takeaway from this is just to make sure that you know where your waste is being treated and how it's being treated. And then also, this is an extremely capital intensive process, right? So as you can see, there's a lot of trucks involved, a lot of people involved. There's a lot of potential for things to fall through the cracks or for there to be hiccups within this process. So that actually leads us to these pain points here on the next slide. So these are just some common pain points that we see and that we hear the most often related to medical waste removal. You may even have some that aren't on here, but this is definitely what we come across most often. So on the top left-hand side of the screen, the most common pain point that we hear that you may be experiencing too is just that high unpredictable pricing. So it goes back to lack of transparency. We're really going to dissect this high unpredictable pricing throughout the next few slides in this presentation and really explain how you can understand your pricing better. But just know it's related to, not having visibility into what you're spending. The next one down, significant storage constraints. So this really just depends on what your storage facility, what it looks like at your facility. You may have more space than other facilities, but also, just throughout the pandemic, that's definitely amplified this pain point. So we've even worked with, some skilled nursing facilities that they've had to rent out pods because their storage just is at max capacity, right? Their volume has increased throughout the pandemic, and now they just don't physically have the space to store their infectious waste. So now they're having to find other solutions for that. So this is a huge issue and a huge pain point for a lot of groups we work with. That next one down, regulatory paperwork. So that's related to your manifests. So what a manifest is it's a document that you receive when your medical waste is picked up. So it explains what exactly was picked up, the date of that service, and it's important to keep these for 3 years in order to be compliant. If you were ever audited, you need to produce 3 years of these paper documents. Sometimes they are stored electronically, but you do need to have them at every location. So that can be challenging for some groups to locate that information, to keep it organized. It's just one more step in the process, right? That next one down, scheduling pickups. So this also goes back to significant storage constraints, right? So if you don't have the space, you might have to schedule an additional pickup. And we've seen that throughout the pandemic. So if you are running out of space, maybe you have to call your provider, maybe you're on a weekly schedule or an every 2-week schedule and your volume has increased. And now you're calling your provider to have them come out one extra time to pick up your waste. So it's not as easy as actually just calling them. You have to find, the dedicated person to call them, and then you have to organize that pickup. You have to make sure someone's at your facility to walk that person back through your facility. And oftentimes they don't come out instantly. It might take them a few days or even weeks to come out and pick up that waste. And it's costly to schedule that pickup. So that's an added charge that you are paying because your volume has increased. So that's definitely a pain point that we've seen. So the top right-hand side there, multi-vendor management. Some groups we work with, they are using multiple vendors simply because maybe they have a location in a more rural area. They're not able to use the same vendor, or they have a lot of locations scattered across the country. Or maybe their contracts were up at different times, but it can be very confusing. You're dealing with different service centers, different passwords, different contract end dates. So it's difficult to keep yourself organized when you're dealing with multiple vendors. The next one down, regulatory and compliance training. So that's related to your mandatory training. So for example, your bloodborne pathogen training that you have to do. Some medical waste providers will offer that as part of their solution. Maybe you're using a third party for that as well. Sometimes you're paying for that and you don't even know that you're paying for it. But this is something that you have to keep track of. But not only the compliance training, but also the waste segregation training, right? So to make sure that your staff is aware of what is red bag waste and what is regular trash. We've seen throughout the pandemic, volumes have increased simply because there's just no guidance around waste segregation and there's no training involved in what constitutes red bag waste, right? So making sure that you're educating your staff on what to throw in red bag and what to throw in regular trash, and then you're constantly monitoring that moving forward. So needle pricks, that is a common pain point that we see. It's just unfortunately a part of storing infectious waste. I think there's a statistic like 13% of healthcare facilities, they have at least one staff member per year with a needle prick. So it's just something you definitely want to be aware of. And you want to make sure that you have all of the safety measures in place to prevent that from happening, especially right now as it relates to COVID-19. And the last one down, ordering and inventory management. So that's related to your sharps containers. Now, some medical waste providers, they do offer those, so you can buy them from your provider. Most often we see groups purchasing them from a separate vendor. So that goes back to multi-vendor management, right? But it takes more than one person to manage this process. So not only do you have to make sure that you're tracking the inventory of this at each one of your locations, so there's someone at each site tracking this inventory, but then there's also someone else typically who's placing the order. And it's not something that you want to forget to place the order for or run out of. And so it's one more thing to keep track of that's taking you away from patient care. So these are the most common pain points that we see. Next slide. So let's move into that high unpredictable pricing. There's a lot that goes into the fact that the high unpredictable pricing is the most common pain point, and we'll walk you through some sample invoices in just a second. But what we see related to the high unpredictable pricing is, first, there's oftentimes a 5 to 7% annual increase on your bill. So, medical waste disposal, it is kind of an ancillary service. You sign up for it once. Maybe you're with the same provider for 5 years, 10 years. All of a sudden, you look at your invoice, you look at your bill, and you're paying substantially more than you did when you signed up. Although your value has not increased. You're not getting more for your money. It's the same value, but more expensive. So that's related to that 5 to 7% annual increase that creeps up on you over time and does add up over time. So that's important to look at. Just if you want to go ahead and look at your invoice, see if this has been happening throughout the years, if you've been with the same provider for years and years. The next one down, hidden fuel charges. So you may also see on your invoice something that says environmental fee, fuel charges. But again, this is an extra added fee that maybe you didn't know you were going to be paying for when you signed up for your service. Maybe it's not in your contract that you'd be paying for this, but now it's on your invoice. And this varies in terms of cost. So that's definitely something else you want to look out for. The next one, lack of pricing transparency. So again, your invoice is not necessarily clear sometimes on what you're spending. Most of the time with any vendor you may have, you get an invoice, you know exactly what you purchased, how much of that item that you purchased, and then that end dollar amount that you're spending. Sometimes with medical waste providers, they make it very confusing. Maybe you have some type of package and then you just have a flat dollar amount, but it doesn't necessarily say what you are spending your money on. So we'll walk you through what that looks like. And then the next one down, under servicing or over servicing. So that really goes back to, right sizing your pickup frequency. it's very difficult to make sure that you have a pickup frequency that meets your needs at every point in time during the year or during the life cycle of your business. Your volume, your needs change and fluctuate, and it's a very reactive model where you then have to go back to your provider and tell them, hey, we need you to come out more often, or we don't need you to come out as much. So, for example, underservicing would be maybe your volume has increased. Maybe you're on an every 2-week pickup frequency, and you have boxes of medical waste overtaking your bio room, and now you need to schedule an additional pickup for that medical waste or rent out a storage pod outside your facility, which we have seen. And so in that scenario, you are being underserviced. If you're overserviced, that means that the driver is coming out, but there's no waste to be picked up. So maybe you're on that every 2-week frequency, they're coming out, but there's no waste to be picked up, and you're paying for that waste to be picked up anyways. So in that scenario, you're being overserviced. So just something to look at if your frequency is meeting your needs at this point in time. Maybe it met your needs 3 months ago, a year ago, but at this point in time, maybe it's different. The next one down, added services. So you may see some other fees on your bill, such as, compliance training, OSHA training, things of that nature, or any type of PPE fee or COVID fee. There might be just some added fees. Also, maybe, pharmaceutical waste, hazardous waste, that might be listed on your invoice as well. So just something to keep an eye on your invoice. And then that last one, allotment model. So this is where the lack of transparency comes into play. This is where it can be very confusing to understand your bill. So the way that the allotment model works is when you sign up for a medical waste provider to come out and service your organization, they tell you, okay, great, based on your specialty, based on your volume, this is what we think you need, right? So they might say, we think you need 100 boxes picked up in a 12-month period. So within a year, you'll probably be utilizing 100 boxes of medical waste. And then they'll divide that by 12. And that will be your monthly cost. And that is what you pay for every month. Now, what happens is if you don't fill 100 boxes of medical waste and they come out all year and maybe they've only picked up 70 boxes or 50 boxes, you're still paying for that 100 box rate. So you're still paying the same dollar amount every month, even though you're not using that box rate. So that's where it can be very confusing. So there's always that floor that you're guaranteed to spend that dollar amount, whether or not you're using it. And that's where we find groups are significantly overspending and they don't even realize it because they can't understand their invoice to see how they arrived at that number. So with that, I am going to pass it over to Desiree for her to walk you through more specifics about invoicing and pricing.
Thank you, Lauren. So on this next slide here, we do have a sample contract. We are going to go through some of those items that Lauren just went through, so the reasons why there's high and predictable pricing. So part of that, and a big one of that, is the allotment model. And like she walked you through, so we have a sample contract here. The sample contract states that this facility is signed up for RMW. They get 312 bio boxes per year. That is divided by 12, and it comes out to $1,170 per month monthly cost. These contracts are hard to understand because it doesn't tell you what the box rate is. So it's really hard to compare on was this priced out correctly? Are you being overcharged? Another issue with the allotment model is COVID. So what we saw last year for a lot of facilities who were on the allotment model, they were given 312 containers per year, let's say, and by the month of May, they were through 250 boxes. So two things happened. One, the vendor or a sales rep with your vendor could have called and said, hey, look, you're trending at 700 boxes per year. Should we increase your annual allotment? Of course, your admin is going to sign off on that just to avoid that overage charge. So you sign off on that now you're allotted 700 containers per year and you're paying $2,000 per month, which might have been great during that time because you had that volume and you needed that support. However, now we're in 2021. Do the needs of 2020 reflect your needs of 2021? So I highly encourage you guys, if any of you guys experience an increase in volume in the year of 2020 and you increase your allotment, take a look at your needs in 2021. Do they match your 2020? And if they do, then there might be some room for volume management. We'll talk about that in a second. On the other hand, if your vendor didn't reach out to you and this went unnoticed and you were given 312 containers per year and you blew through your allotment because you're a skilled nursing facility and you had a COVID outbreak and it was just not a great year. Now you're paying 10% per additional container cost. And it's very difficult, and that 10% doesn't sound like a lot because you don't know what your box rate is. So we are going to go through in a few slides on how to decode what your box rate is and the impact of that 10% on top of your box rate. So here you will also see some of that additional information, like the additional stop charge. This typically happens if you get a pickup outside of your frequency, which in this sample contract here is every 2 weeks. Some of the other things I'd like to know are on your agreement, you will see fuel charges, energy fees, environmental fees. These numbers do look small. 50% doesn't sound high, but for some of you who did experience COVID pretty badly, that 15% on some of those 30,000 monthly invoices for RMW turns out to be quite a bit. Now, on your agreement in fine print, there's always something on every contract. It typically ranges anywhere between 5 to 7%, and it will say your cost will not increase by more than 6% annually. So this is an agreement you want to review every 5 years to help bring down your cost. Here we have some sample invoices. So here's an example of over-servicing. So this sample here specifically does show an allotment model. And the way that looks like, it will say something like RMW monthly, and that you have a monthly charge. You don't know what that includes, but you know you used 7 containers that month, and there were $0 in charge because they were included in your allotment that year. But if you think about it, 7 containers at about $100 each sounds very, very expensive. For those of you who know the medical waste space, an average box rate's anywhere between $20 to $65 per box. So $100 per box is quite a bit. So this situation here should raise a red flag to anyone saying, I'm overspending, I'm on a frequency, or I have an allotment that I don't need. Another one, and a common thing we find, are added services. So up here in blue, we see hazardous drug disposal. And what happens, and just for you guys to know, hazardous drug disposal is extremely expensive with whatever vendor you might find. It ranges anywhere between $500 to $1,000 to dispose of a little box of hazardous drugs. Now, within long-term care, there's not a lot of hazardous drugs you are producing, and it is a rare instance. But what happens is when you do produce that waste, your admin, your director of maintenance is calling your medical waste provider saying, hey, we need a pickup for hazardous drug. Your rep then says, well, let's make sure you don't pay for that expensive transactional charge. Let's make sure we bundle it into your allotment, and now you're allotted 1 or maybe 6 hazardous drug disposals per year, and now your monthly cost has increased in this situation by $123 per month. So if you do go back and review your invoices, do you have services on there that you're not using? Hazardous drug is a huge one that we see all the time. So do you have hazardous drug disposal? Challenge that. Are you using it? When's that last time you used that service? Would you benefit more paying for it on an on-needed basis, or should you pay for it yearly despite not using it? Another common added service is compliance training. Oftentimes, long-term care facilities have other in-house solutions or another partner who does all of their bloodborne pathogen courses, and unknowingly, they are still paying for compliance training through their vendor. So that's easy money to save. If you have it on there, guaranteed you probably have a system in place within your facilities. So you push back on that. We're not using that service. Some of the other ones are those random fees. So we have that environmental regulatory fee on the sample invoice here. We also saw this past year COVID PPE fees. Guarantee that wasn't on your contract that you signed 5 years ago. So these are things you can push back on. In fact, there's really no standard to these fees. It's essentially what can your vendor get away with. Some customers will get that 15% fee. Other customers will push back and get 0% on environmental fees and additional fees. So if you see these on your invoice, push back, question why it's there. All right. So here we have another example. It's very similar to the other one. The big takeaway here is we have that added service. So if this was my invoice, I should raise a red flag that we see hazardous drug disposal here in blue. I have the allotment model. So, okay, so I have the allotment model. I pay $656. I used 7 containers that were $0 in charge, which means it was part of that allotment. But now I have an additional container charge. That means I went over my annual allotment, and my additional container charge is $83 per container. So for those of you who didn't increase your allotment, you then experience that overcharge per container. And it can get very expensive because there was, and to kind of backtrack to COVID, unfortunately last year with COVID, there wasn't really any clear guidance on what was considered medical waste and what was considered regular trash. And so a lot of facilities were producing 400 to 600 boxes a month, and they were about 100 to 200 in bed size. So, 83 times 500, that becomes a very, very expensive medical waste bill. So 1, get a great box rate. 2, if you have high volume, why do you have high volume? Where's the room for improvement within waste segregation? All right, so demanding storage constraints. So some of that will be because you are a smaller facility, you don't have space, you have an isolation break, and now you have to call for extra pickups. Lauren did touch on this quite a bit previously, but we did talk to several skilled nursing facilities who didn't have that guidance on how to segregate their COVID waste, how to rent out pods because they just didn't have space within their facility and were producing just so much waste. Despite being on a 3 times per week pickup, 2 times per week pickup, they still needed to rent out pods to store their additional medical waste. There's always safety and compliance concerns with having too much of medical waste within your facility, it producing any type of odor. And when you call for that pickup, you're probably noticing it when your facility is already full. So that pickup, unfortunately, it's very difficult operationally for that pickup to happen that same day. Oftentimes we see about a week to 2 weeks in delay. And the reason and the issues within programs today, it's that they are very reactive versus proactive in regards to volume management. And what I mean by that is if your volume increases, you call your vendor and you need another pickup. They respond with, yeah, I'll happily come out there, and boom, your cost now increased. Versus being proactive. And a proactive partner would more so look at your volume increase and say, wait a second, like your volume is much higher than another skilled nursing or another AL facility of similar size. Let's dig into why, and let's talk about waste segregation and find that room for improvement. So right-sizing pickup schedules. So back to the allotment model. It is honestly the worst model you can actually be on for a few reasons. It's very inflexible. I call it the use it or lose it model because you're either overpaying because you went over your allotment, or you're paying for something you're not using. They're very inflexible in regards to frequencies, contract. And let's say you had your annual allotment of 200 containers per year, but you put systems in place, you reduce your frequency, you reduce your volume, you're still trapped into that recurring monthly cost. So it's just really not an ideal model. The other option is the transactional model, which is much, much preferred. In fact, some of you who are in the allotment model guaranteed that your same vendor does offer that transactional model. In the transactional model, it's a better way where you pay for what you use. The downside of it is that there are there is a need for systems in place to make sure if you're on a weekly pickup frequency, does that make sense for you? Or are you producing 1 box, but you can really be producing 20 boxes a month? So with the transactional model, yes, you are paying for what you use, but oftentimes if the trunk comes out there and there's not enough waste or there's no waste, you are still paying for that. All right, so multi-vendor management. So we see this, the bigger the enterprise, typically the more vendors involved, just because you're across several states or if you have rural areas. And when you have several vendors, you're doing everything different at each individual site. And oftentimes what we find within the medical waste industry is that it's very decentralized. We see contracts at the site level, making it harder to wrap your arms around your program. So there's variable pricing, variable terms. It's a fragmented program, meaning everyone's doing something a little differently. They're storing the regulatory paperwork that is required to be compliant differently. Some have it on a portal, some aren't storing it, and some having it in a logbook. So when you do have that audit, it's really a pain in the butt to get it all together. And it also creates no visibility into inefficiencies. So it's very difficult when you have several vendors to say, my facility of X size is producing 10 times the amount of volume as this other facility if they're with different vendors. All right, so we know a little bit about the medical waste space, the industry, the common pain points. Now let's talk about how to understand what kind of program you're currently in. So back to that allotment model, let's walk through what that contract looks like, how to understand that contract. So the allotment model, this looks similar to what we had previously up above. And this is actually from a customer who was an assisted living facility. They were on the allotment model. They were allotted 6 containers per year, 6 tops per year, which is equivalent to every 8 weeks. And they were paying $179 per month. Now, $179 doesn't sound bad when you compare that to other expenses within your facility. However, if you decode this to figure out your box rate, you then realize how much this facility was actually paying. So, and let me add to that, they were not rural. So let's do the math to figure out how to figure out your box rate. So for those of you who are in the allotment model, this is how you can determine what your box rate is. So you want to pull that monthly service fee. You're going to multiply it by 12 for the annual cost, and you're going to divide it by your annual allotted containers, which in this situation was 6. When you divide that, the math turns out to be 358. So they're paying 358 per container. And like I mentioned previously, the standard is typically 20 to 65, so they're extremely, extremely overpaying, but this is a way to make it sound like they're not overpaying if they're paying monthly. On top of that, if they still used 3 of those 6 containers as an assisted living, they were still paying for all 6 at a $358 box rate. Now, on that contract, at the very left, you can see in yellow those additional fees, that $5 per stop, energy fee, the environmental fee, which typically ranges anywhere between 10 to 15%. However, like I mentioned, several facilities, when they push back, they manage to get these all at 0. Now on the very right in fine print, you'll always see that 5 to 7% annual increase. In their situation, they had a 6% annual increase. So this is how you would read your contract. If you're in the allotment model, you want to understand what your box rate is so you can compare it to those in the industry. And you also want to know what you're allotted per year. So if you're allotted 6 containers per year, you want to know that so then you can compare to the next slide. Oh, actually JK. So you then would compare to your invoices what you're really using. So contracts let you know what you're contracted for. Your invoices show you what you're using. So prior to moving to invoices, we are going to move to a transactional model and what that contract looks like. The nice thing about a transactional model, it will tell you right off the bat what your box price is. So in this situation, it's $35. Oftentimes you see a minimum box per pickup. In this situation, it's 3, meaning if the truck comes out there and there's 0 boxes, you're still paying $105. If he picks up 2, you're still paying $105. They were given 13 pickups per year. transactional models will also have additional fees. So if you have a transactional model, like, good job, that's a great step. But do you have these additional fees that you can push back on? And on the very right, like I mentioned, any hauling agreement is going to have that 5 to 7% annual increase. There's no way around the 5 to 7% annual increase, but it does mean you want to check your program. If you haven't looked at your contract in 10 to 20 years, it's probably time to make sure you look at that and you negotiate your price back down. Okay, so we can now identify what kind of program we're in. So are we in the allotment? How do I determine my box rate? Am I in the transactional model? Like, know how to read that. Are there any additional fees that I can give pushback on? Now we're going to go on forward to how to optimize your program and reduce your spend. So like I mentioned, your contracts determine what you were contracted for, and your invoices show what you're actually using. So you want to look at your invoices. We always look about 60 to 90 days for skilled nursing facilities. For ALs, we typically look at like 6 months to a year, just because some ALs have very, very low frequencies and have maybe 2 pickups per year or would benefit for 2 pickups per year. So when you're an AL, you typically look at least at 6 months. Skilled nursing facility, you want to look at 60 to 90 days of invoices. You want to look at your contracts and see how many containers are you averaging monthly. Are you paying quite a bit? So back to that example, they were paying $656 and they had 7 containers this month. Did they have 5 containers in the month prior and maybe another 5 the month prior to that? If so, they're paying about $100 per box rate, meaning you're paying for more than you need, and that should prompt you to bring down your allotment. Better yet, maybe speak to your provider and switching to a transactional model without extending your agreement. For those of you on the transactional model, it is a better model. However, you still have those no waste pickups. You might have signed up for a service back in 2020 for 2 times per week pickups, and you haven't changed your frequencies, meaning you're having a lot of no waste pickups, or the truck is coming out and you're paying for services you don't need. So if you do see low volume and the truck coming out too frequently, so back to being over-serviced, you want to make sure you reduce that frequency. And this is something you should be doing regularly, at least on a quarterly basis for a skilled nursing facility. Another thing you want to do is compare your volume. How does your volume compare to what it was like prior to COVID? Is it higher? How does it compare to others in the industry? So you want to have systems in place to know where are you at compared to others. In fact, we talked to so many facilities, and there's just such a large span of like who's a volume. So you have some facilities that are 150 producing 450 containers per month. They just know their spend is high and they think box rate, when the actual issue is that they need to implement waste segregation practices because they have really high volume. Another skilled nursing facility of the same size will produce anywhere between 2 to 10 boxes a month. So there's a large opportunity for savings, but you have to identify what's your problem. Are you in a contract that you don't know how to read and you have a high box rate? Are you paying for pickups when you don't need to be paying for pickups? Or 3, do you have volume issues? If so, there's waste segregation initiatives your facility should look into. With that, on to the full program optimization. So research has shown that for a hospital who does procedures, meaning they produce quite a bit in red bag, out of all of their waste, about 3 to 5% of that is actually RMW. So how can you bring down your cost from all of this to that 3 to 5%? You can implement waste segregation practices. Really identify what's going into my red bag. Do you have paper towels, lunch boxes, PPE? And it's a big component of reducing your waste. Another great method is having an on-site treatment disposal. There are alternative methods out there that would immediately sterilize your medical waste and reduce the cost of pickups, which are very, very expensive. Also, reducing your RMW packaging volume helps reduce your cost. There's something that is always said, it's the bigger the red bag, the more likely that random stuff gets placed in there. So some of the things to look at is regularly auditing invoices to ensure optimization, have a waste segregation initiative. If you have high volume, how does that compare to industry standard? And if you have no waste charges, reduce your frequency. And as always, look for an alternative method to divert some of that waste, whether that's going into regular trash or being immediately sterilized. All right, so here we have an AL case study. So this was an AL facility. They were 19 location assisted living facility across several states. So on the right, you'll see their spend was all over the place for a few reasons. They had several different vendors. They were in different states. Even that same location could be paying $100 one month and then $200 the next month because it's a volume-based program, whether it's allotted or transactional model. And in some situations, they were storing their waste up to 12 weeks. Through optimization techniques, they centralized to a single vendor to have their arms around the program, centralized agreement, they fixed their pricing, and chose transparent pricing. They found a solution that allowed them to do immediate on-site sterilization of infectious waste, and this provided them an overall savings cost of 45%. The nice thing for assisted livings are that if you have high waste or a large red bag volume output, you should challenge that. A lot of assisted living facilities shouldn't be producing red bag. It's primarily sharps and maybe some wound care. And there's a lot of other methods. You can reduce your volume. You can find an on-site sterilization technique that will completely eliminate 100% of your hauling cost. So for assisted living, that is a huge recommendation. Now, for SNF facilities, we have isolation breaks, and that's very variable. But what you can do is still implement these optimization techniques, and we have this case study here to show the success of that. So this was a skilled nursing facility that back in March of 2020, they were averaging about 30 boxes per month. They were on the allotment model, so they were paying overage charges. They had out of control volume, multiple agreements across several facilities. So then they implemented optimization techniques. They strategically placed their red bags where they need to be. They took on a waste segregation initiative. They implemented an on-site sterilization method that would sterilize some of their medical waste, majority of their medical waste, and then their volume for pickups dramatically decreased. In fact, it decreased by 75%, providing them 82% in savings. So it's huge value with implementing optimization into your program today. So that was quite a bit. So to kind of help summarize all of that, medical waste summary. So lack of advancements in medical waste industry has led to operational complexity and overspending. Oops. Decentralization of medical waste programs, meaning having contracts at the site level, results in varying spend, terms, and management process. It really makes it very difficult to understand which of your facilities are overspending and help compare volume. COVID-19 has amplified a lot of these pain points over the past year, adversely affecting future spend. By that, I mean, you might have increased your allotment, increased your frequency last year, whether you're on the allotment model or transactional. What does your spend in 2021 look like? What do your needs in 2021 look like? For those of you who haven't adjusted your volume or haven't adjusted your allotment model, you should challenge what frequency you're on today, because you might be overspending due to 2020. Contracts and pricing and invoices are often structured in a way that makes it very difficult to interpret. A great thing, a good practice is understand what kind of contract you're in. Go back and look at the slides, and if you're in the allotment model, walk through those steps to figure out what your box rate is. How does that compare to those in the industry? If you're in the transactional model and you have a pickup every 13 weeks or maybe weekly, but you're not using that because your invoices show you have a lot of no waste pickups, reduce that frequency. Medical waste reduction achieved through proper waste segregation and alternative sterilization technology can reduce volume and spend by as much as 80%. All right, so getting here to the end. So current program recommendations, if you're in the allotment model, speak to your vendor and request a transactional model without extending your agreement. This ensures that you're no longer in that use it or lose it model, and you're more so paying for what you actually use. Know your box rate and compare it to industry standard. So go back, do that math, or if you're in the transactional model, look and see what it says your box rate is. Is it really high? Is it within that industry standard range? Push back on any extra charges you might have, or at least challenge them. Do you have COVID PPE charges? Do you have environmental fees all of a sudden, and you didn't prior? And like I mentioned, and Lauren had mentioned, medical waste is an ancillary service. So if you just check the box, sign up for the service, your program today is probably much more expensive and very different than what you had originally contracted for. Centralize your program when possible to have more visibility. Protect all your facilities, having them under one agreement. Adopt waste segregation initiatives and have systems in place to help compare your volume to others in the industry. So if you're a 50-bed facility and you're at 50 boxes a month, you need to know that that's considered high compared to others of your same size. Implement quarterly audit, at least at a minimum, quarterly auditing to optimize spend. So to kind of recap that, you want to look at 60 to 90 days of invoices if you're a skilled nursing facility, about 6 months if you're an AL facility. You want to look at your contract because your contract lets you know what you're contracted for and your invoices let you know what you're using. You want to reduce frequencies if you see no waste pickups without extending your contract. And you want to remove any added or unused services. So check your contract. Did you just have RMW and all of a sudden you're seeing hazardous waste charges on your invoice? Are you using that service? All right, so that was quite a bit. Megan, on to you, and I think we're ready for Q&A.
Awesome, excellent. Wow. Well, Des, Lauren, thank you so much for that incredibly informative and thorough presentation. We do have time now for a few questions. I've got a lot here, so we'll get started. And just a reminder to all of our attendees, you can feel free to put more questions in the chat. Please send them to me directly so that they're easy to find. And again, if we don't hit everyone's questions today during this live portion, we will get answers to you via email. Make sure you stay tuned after our Q&A to learn how Direct Supply can help you with this. Okay, let's start with this one. How much information do I actually need in order to feel good auditing my location?
Yeah, so if you're in the regular habit of doing it quarterly, so you're looking about invoices every quarter and saying, okay, if I'm in the allotment model, and then you can get out of the allotment model. So number one, you want to try to get out of that model. And number two, if you're stuck in that model, look at it every 3 months. Are you using those containers? Or if you're in the transactional model, are you using that frequency? Do you have no waste pickups? Can you reduce that frequency? So 60 to 90 days of invoices and doing it every quarter, I would recommend.
Awesome. That's actually going to answer our next one, which was about how often you recommend doing it. And I did hear that during that last little bit too. And as a reminder for everyone, this slide deck will be available for you in our email tomorrow. So if you didn't get all of those very good details, it will be coming. Let's jump into this one next. Are there any visual reminders or documents that you know of to help us ensure that our staff understands red bag items and protocols?
Yeah, absolutely. So your vendors today, they should have some sort of infographic. There are volume management partners out there that can provide infographics that really walk you through, this goes in here, this goes in there, and that definitely goes into regular trash. As well with where your red bag should be placed within your facility. Little things like that really help reduce what goes into red bag and then therefore increasing your spend.
Excellent. Okay, so this one is a little bit of a shift. What classifies drugs as hazardous and how are we able to begin on-site treatment?
Yeah, so drugs that are hazardous are essentially drugs that are regulated differently than pharmaceutical waste. So pharmaceutical is controlled and non-controlled, and there's hazardous pharmaceutical waste. Some of that you do see within long-term care would be like warfarin, for example. I would refer to your SDS sheets and look at your drugs and see what is actually considered hazardous. And very rarely within the long-term care space, you'll see that you'll have some of that medication. And when you do, you just call for that pickup when you need it. You want to make sure it's not something you're regularly producing, so it's not a service you want to be regularly having.
Awesome. Okay, so this one goes back to the contract process and optimizing it. It specifically asks who should be involved in that process, and does it require a team of existing employees, or is this an individual that's added specifically to do this?
I'm not too sure, Megan, what they're referring to in regards to the contract. But when it comes to contracts, just in general, you do want to have it centralized. You want to make sure, especially as an enterprise, you want to make sure it's centralized, because what we oftentimes see happen is that agreements are done at the site level, and you have a rep call, a DON or an admin, and they're busy doing so many things, and the rep says, hey, just sign off on this, you're using this service. Nurse or whoever signs off on it, and now your agreement has rolled over into another 5 years and your monthly cost has increased. So very big recommendation is having that agreement centralized. And if you don't know what your contracts look like today because it's decentralized, pull your contracts together today, see when those terms expire, and do your best to centralize them.
I love that. That's helpful. Okay, so does OnSite offer a program for medical destruction, specifically in the narcotics, or does that often go through a pharmacy or someone else?
Yeah, so OnSite, we do have solutions to take care of all your medical waste. We have volume management, all that great technology to really help bring optimization to your program. Now, for long-term care facilities, a great solution, and if you don't have this in place today, is having a partnership with your pharmacy. And sometimes they do take-back programs. So if the pharmacy is approved to do take back, they can take back your pharmaceuticals at no cost. And it's honestly the best solution for long-term care facilities.
I love this. So I think it also helps answer this one. Is the packaging on hazardous medications supposed to go into hazardous waste, or is it just the medication itself?
Is the packaging for hazardous waste? So there's different containers for hazardous waste. And so that for hazardous waste, it's typically a black container, and you want to collect your hazardous drugs within there, and then that gets taken away by the hauler and then is then incinerated and treated.
I love that. Thank you. And during an emergency service, or for instance, a snowstorm, hurricane, things like that, can contracts be changed without penalties, or do you often see penalties incurred?
Every contract is different. So you would have to look at your contract. Some of you guys who your contract has rolled over, you might have a month-to-month after, so you might have an easier out. So all contracts are different and every state is different. Some states have laws in place to help protect customers in getting out of agreements without penalties. So recommendation is to look at your contract. What does it say? What does that out look like?
Awesome. And I think that this was answered during the final portion, but because it came in, I'm going to ask it here too. Is there a percentage or a range that you often see in savings when you work with communities?
Yeah, we actually had a skilled nursing facility come on board, and within 90 days, they reduced their volume by 45%. So 45% in savings is what they saw. So it's very huge when you implement these procedures of bringing in transparency, know what you're paying for, know what you should be using and should not be using.
Fantastic. Okay, so then our last one that came in, unless a few more roll in while we're answering it, is what's the best way for facilities to maintain optimization ongoing? Is it something that you recommend they do internally or through a connection and partner?
Yeah, so if you're a single site, maybe you do it internally and it's something you have somebody doing regularly on a quarterly basis, or you find a partner like Direct Supply that has systems in place and has a platform to help optimize that automatically for you. And so to the next point, if you're an enterprise, it's even more important to have a platform and technology to really consolidate all of your 50 plus locations.
Okay, and then this one that just came in says, can assisted living communities send back medications or only unused medications?
There are take-back programs for pharmaceutical waste, and for regulated medical waste for assisted living centers, and that's always something to look into. And then there's that option of that pharmacy. So if you have that relationship with a pharmacy, it's going to be the most cost-effective solution.
Fantastic. Okay, one last call for our attendees. If you want to put anything else in the Q&A, we will be sure that that gets answered via email. For now, I'm going to say thank you for all of those really great questions, and an extra big thank you to Desiree and Lauren for sharing your expertise and your time with us today. So now, for anyone interested in learning about how direct supply can help you navigate these new technologies and products, please help me welcome Todd Sobotka, an Innovation Director at Direct Supply's Innovation and Technology Center.
Thank you, Megan, and thank you everybody for joining the past hour. I hope you found it helpful and informative. And I just wanted to kind of wrap everything together and take it to another level on how Direct Supply got a little bit more actively involved in this. OnSite had approached Direct Supply because they had a very unique and novel technology, and naturally that comes to the innovation team. And what we looked at in the marketplace, we said, this is fascinating and we're going to talk about it. But as we reached out to customers like yourself, we realized that they weren't being treated the way we thought that they should be treated. And hopefully you all know that if there's one thing that really sticks in the side of Direct Supply is when someone in senior care, our customers, aren't being treated the way we feel they should be treated by the marketplace. We try and figure out a way to address that. And so we worked with OnSite that had a very unique technology. And what we have built now with them is a full offering to address all of your medical waste needs. As you see in the screen in front of you, we have the technology, which, and happy to answer any quick questions after this, but that TE5000, as we call it, can address your sharps needs and small red bag waste, which is actually it's pretty fascinating. It sterilizes there and allows you to immediately sterilize it and throw it in your normal trash, which is very, very different. We've actually seen in a lot of assisted living facilities this unit eliminating all pickups, so no more hauling, nobody into your facilities. Beyond that, we wanted to make sure we wanted to make sure our customers didn't have just another vendor that they had another contract with. So it was important to have a full offering. And so as you've heard, what doesn't go in the unit, we will work with you in addressing any of your other medical waste needs, whether it's pharma or hazardous or red bag, through a hauling process. Work to get as competitive of rates for you in nice flexible contracts, which I will comment on too. But we wrap this all in a relational consultative structure because we want to be your med waste partner. Again, we just felt our customers weren't being treated the way they should, and we want to go Direct Supply on that and be your partner in driving down your waste, driving down those costs. And thus far, the customer feedback has just been incredibly positive. And that's both in just the service they're receiving and also what they're seeing and what it's doing for their costs and driving it down. And I just want to give you a couple quick examples of what I mean on what a partnership should look like. You sign a contract through the Direct Supply OnSite partnership. The first thing OnSite does is bring in a national expert to sit down with your leadership team to talk about what you're doing, why you're doing it, and how you can do it better. And what we've seen is even beyond just the competitive rates and the technology, the transformation in the first 3 to 6 months in driving down usage, that waste segregation and the procedures involved and the behavior around that through that simple, just those conversations and education has been incredibly impactful. And beyond that, I think Des alluded to how often you should be looking at your invoices. You should probably be doing it on a quarterly basis. Well, that's actually part of this program. Proactively, OnSite will reach out to you each quarter and talk about what they're seeing in your waste, in your medical waste and the usage. If there's a spike, we're going to talk to you, figure out what's going on there, and is there a better way to address some of the needs? If you're in the first 3 to 6 months and you're improving, we're going to talk about what changes we can make to your program, again, that better fit your needs at that time. It's a customized program to what you need at that point in time, because it's all about driving down those costs. But beyond those couple examples, I just want to hit upon some of the pain points you heard Lauren and Des go through. We want to get rid of. We want to eliminate the contracts with multiple vendors across the organization. This is simple. It's a consolidated corporate contract with standardized terms, locked in pricing that is flexible to move and to change based off of your ever-changing needs. And additionally, get rid of all those unpredictable prices. That's nuts. What I have seen as we started looking at this space, and I was completely shocked, is the nickel and diming of our customers. These hidden fees, these upcharges, the annual increases. No more annual increases, no hidden fees, transparent pricing, locked in for the length of your term, again, within a flexible environment that allows you to move within those transparent pricings based off of how your needs change. And then even beyond that, forget the same old hauling. We talked about this going back to, Lauren, what was it, the 60s? We're talking 50, 60, 70 years of the same thing. For goodness sakes, let's bring in some technology. And what we've brought in is a technology, like we said, it's going to immediately sterilize and get rid of your sharps and small red bag waste. In some cases, like I said, eliminate hauling altogether. But in most cases, drastically drop down the pickup needs. Pickups are expensive. We got to get rid of those. We want to mitigate the storage constraint issues, which getting rid of the waste helps with immediately. And in the end, too, there is an online portal that is part of this technology that allows for you to better meet and efficiently address any regulatory requirements. If there's an audit, it's click of the button. But even more importantly, we've seen this used, and the feedback has been incredible as a management tool. To get a better sense of what's going on within the organization, to do tracking, to do reporting, and actually just make some better database decisions. And so, you see that in front of you right now. Really in the high end, this is what we're offering, is that partnership based on a technology, transactional, only pay for what you use type service, and then that compliance and reporting aspect that is a byproduct of the technology. And so what am I asking you guys today? If you flip to the next slide, I want you guys to sign up. If you have any interest whatsoever, I want you to sign up for a free program analysis. Now, I was getting some laughs at how simple this slide was earlier, but this is simply all I'm asking. If you have that interest, shoot us an email at that address. Hop on that web page. There's some further information, but it'll also allow you to sign up there. And all you're signing into is to do a follow-up meeting. I apologize. You might get stuck with myself, Lauren, or Des again, but we want to meet with you and get a sense of what your needs are, how you're currently handling medical waste. We are going to ask for, as we said, you got to do a proper analysis. We will ask for 60 to 90 days, so 2 to 3 months of your invoices manifest. So if you want to get ahead of the game and put that together with us, because we want to do an analysis of what your usage actually is, give you that free program and ROI analysis based off of what we're seeing. So sign up and do that. Best, or I should say worst case, is we come back and say, you're doing an incredible job. You've gotten competitive rates. We might make a recommendation or two. We say, keep doing what you're doing. We'll pat you on the back. If you need anything, call us back. Best case scenario, which happens far more than not, we realize that we can make an impact on what you're doing in your organization. We help you get into a better service, a better program for you that is customized to you, and drastically drop your medical waste costs. And again, sign up. We want to make sure that you are being serviced the way you deserve to be serviced as a direct supply customer. Hop on that website, sign up, do the email, and I think you'll be excited with what you hear.
Thank you so much for joining us. Thanks for the phenomenal questions for our Q&A. A big thank you to Desiree, Lauren, and Todd here for your time and your expertise. You can always reach us with questions at webinars@directsupply.com as well. Enjoy the rest of your day, and thanks again for joining us for this important content. Hope to see you again next time.